Day money is back, still ain't finna cap. We back in the stool, we keep it a stack. The best in the game, you know it's a fact. I'm feeling this beat, so I spit on the track. Day money is back, still ain't finna cap. We back in the stool, we keep it a stack. The best in the game, you know it's a fact. I'm feeling this beat, so I spit on the track. They cooking the beats, we feeding the streets. Still roll got a button, they wish they was me. Been killing the game, making my own lane. We back for part 2, the season is same. This is the theme, we making it slap. Come on the show and you better not cap.
Okay, so we're back, no cap, and that's a fact. Season 2 of the No Cap podcast. You already know what it is, No Cap fam. We're back here in the stew. We got another episode of the No Cap podcast, but this one is different. An old friend of my dad's from college hit me up with a story, and it was about him personally. Jimmy Gamble is in the studio today. Jimmy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks
Good,
for having me.
Of course. So let's talk about this story, you being the only one, meaning you were the only one on your swim team whenever you were swimming from a young age all the way until your 4 years at Pitt, and then your 1 year after being the assistant coach. Talk about that experience, what it was like being the only black kid in a predominantly white sport, especially at a time when for us as African Americans, it was very hard for us just to be black in general.
True. My story obviously got started very young. My father was a military vet, and one of the things he wanted he wanted me to know how to swim at a young age.
Okay.
And he was a member of the YMCA back in the day, and he told me, because it's hard for me to remember when I really got started, but he told me that he put me in the water when I was about 5 or 6 years old. He had me splashing around. He saw that I took to the water very nicely. And I think at about the age of almost 7, one of the coaches at the YMCA there in Orange, New Jersey, recognized, my talent in the water with no formal lessons whatsoever. So he asked my father if I'd be interested in swim lessons. And of course, since my dad was already a member, he said yes to it. I was on board because I wanted to learn how to do all the strokes. So around the age of 7, I took formal swim lessons. And by the time I was 8 years old, I could swim all 4 strokes, doing them rather well. And then that led into that same coach asking me to join the swim team. And at the age of 8, I joined the swim team. And from there, I started swimming.
So when you were younger, you're like swimming, and was that the only sport that you enjoyed, or was it something that came so naturally to you? You just decided, I'm just gonna take this and run with it? Because I feel like at a young age, everyone tries with different sports: right. Swimming, basketball, baseball, football, all types of sports. But was this from the moment you got in the pool? Did you realize, all right, this is what I'm gonna do?
No, not at that early age. I will say from the ages of, let's say, 8 till maybe 11.
Okay.
Swimming was the only thing I was doing. And then, as you read further into my story, my parents did divorce. My mom did remarry. We moved up to Livingston, which, as most folks know, is a predominantly white town. I was going to a private school in Livingston, Newark Academy. And it was at Newark Academy where I did take up other sports that I was good in. I did play baseball, I did play soccer, and of course I swam. So I did 3 sports. Right. I did a fall sport, a winter sport, and a spring sport, and excelled in all 3. But swimming was the one sport that I truly excelled in.
So swimming, baseball, you were an athlete when you were younger. And that's something that a lot of us had that ability to do, play a bunch of different sports. But as I was reading on in your story, you realized that once you got into high school, once you went from Newark Academy to Livingston High School, you strictly went to swimming. Now, was that just because, I remember you were talking about the competition and everything, but did you eventually just lose a passion for the other sports and realize that swimming is what I want to do because it's my best sport and it might take me further than high school? Did you ever think that you would have had that opportunity to even get to Pitt at the time?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, when I had to transfer back to the public high school, I still wanted to do all three sports. I wanted to play soccer, I wanted to swim, and I wanted to play baseball. But Livingston back then had a really good sports program in all of these sports. And it was also politicized a little bit. So even though I played town sports and was at Newark Academy, I knew the politics of what was going to happen when I got to the high school level. And Livingston back in the late 70s was a 10th grade through 12th grade high school. So it was only a 3-year high school. And I was already playing varsity sports as a freshman at Newark Academy. So the notion of coming over to Livingston to not participate on the varsity level was not something that I wanted to do. So I was a goalie on the soccer team, and I knew who they were going to pick as their goalie on the varsity team. And on the baseball team, the dynamics back then, just jumping ahead a little bit, Livingston was state champions in baseball in 1980. So if I had stayed on the team, yes, I would have been a state champion baseball player. But I was an athlete who wanted to participate.
Right.
I was
You
not
didn't
one,
wanna
I didn't want to sit on the bench. So my decision came that I wasn't going to sit on the bench for soccer or baseball. And swimming was the one sport that I never ever had to sit on the bench for.
Right. And probably in turn, you staying strictly with swimming probably made you even better because you were able to spend all your time on that particular craft.
Right.
What was the biggest difference for you, you'd say, besides the competition in going from a private school like Newark Academy, which it's a very predominant school. You know, they have some good sports, but then you move to a public school, and obviously, you know, in a public school setting, the amount of competition is a lot bigger just because more kids go to public schools.
Right.
So you're going up against a bunch of different schools all up and down the state.
Right.
What was the biggest difference for you in terms of being able to swim at a private school, then moving to a public school?
Well, another part of my story, which I truly believe I was blessed, when we moved to Livingston, as quiet as it was kept, I was swimming at Newark Academy, which had a pool. I was still a member of my local YMCA team, which was a pool.
Okay.
And then I was in Livingston, which had outdoor pools during the summertime. So I was that first generational swimmer, believe it or not, that could swim year round. You know, today these athletes, they participate in their sports year round.
Right.
So I was blessed with having pools year round. So that was the first thing that helped me. The other thing that also helped was the fact that, you're right, coming from a private school where I excelled very well and coming into the public school area, you know, you've got a lot more competition. You know, you've got kids from, you know, all over the county, where in the private school area, you know, it's just a select group of kids that are going to these private schools. Right. What helped me was the fact that my YMCA team was a regional YMCA. So I was swimming on my own team with kids from Livingston, New Jersey, kids from Caldwell, kids from Roseland, kids from Essex Fells. So I had a regional swim team and a regional group of kids to swim with, who, by the way, were rather good swimmers. So that, in fact, made me a better swimmer.
So you're moving on from high school and you end up going to Pitt. Let's talk about that process between your senior year at high school and then you're moving on to go to the University of Pittsburgh. What was the recruitment process for you at the time? Because I feel like you're going to play a Division I sport at a big Division I school, but obviously we knew back then at the time football was the sport at Pitt. So what was it like at a time like that, being recruited to go to a Division I school, and was Pitt the only school that you had an option to go to?
Right. So just backing up a little bit, you know, my junior year going into my senior year of high school, you know, I was as we would call it, I was a scorer. I was either, you know, first place to third place. But I really didn't realize how good I was until my senior year when, you know, at the YMCA level, when you qualify for Y Nationals, okay, this is a big deal because now you've made a qualifying standard which is recognized all over the country. So I had qualified for, the New Jersey YMCA state tournaments in swimming, and then I had qualified for Y Nationals. So now qualifying is one thing, because it's basically a time that you've met and they're saying, okay, well, you're now invited to come to this big national swim meet. That's when I realized, I said, I can swim with these guys. So in my head, I said, okay, so now this is something that I want to do, at the next level.
Right.
And I want to see, if I can get recruited to do so. Now, I tell you another funny story since you brought it up. Back in the day, we had to handwrite out our applications. And we had a school career night one night at Livingston. And I wanted to go to, all the big swimming schools. I wanted to go to Texas. I wanted to go to UCLA.
Right.
I wanted to go to University of Florida. And I came home with all these applications. And my mother was my deciding factor. So, these kids today, they get to pick and choose where they can go. So my mother tore up all these applications of where I wanted to go. And she drew on a map, where I could go.
Okay.
So that map basically was New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and as far north as Massachusetts. So I went and got a recruit trip to Boston College. I saw the University of Maryland. I saw Pittsburgh. And I also saw Northeastern University.
Okay.
But it's as quiet as it's kept. I wanted to go to Penn State. Yes, I know all my Pitt fans out there are saying, what?
Yeah, the Pitt fans are not going to be happy about that one.
They're not going to be happy about that one. But a lot of my friends, about 14 of my high school friends, were going to Penn State. And I wanted to go to Penn State because I would have had high school friends there.
Right, and Penn State's actually a really popular school amongst
exactly.
a lot of kids. I have a lot of friends that go to Penn State, yeah.
So I wanted to go to Penn State, but I didn't get recruited, didn't get any scholarship offers, nothing. So believe it or not, I got the scholarship offers to Rutgers, which I forgot that I did their recruit trips, but I got it to Rutgers, but I knew I didn't want to stay at home in New Jersey.
Right.
I got one to Boston College, and I didn't like their swimming pool. And then, of course, I got the one to Pittsburgh, and, of course, I love their pool. I mean, if you ever get the chance or look it up, I mean, it's got one of the best facilities probably on the East Coast. So I fell in love with the program, and, that's how my decision was made. My mother drew a map, and I picked the best pool.
That's understandable. So, you had options,
Right.
And obviously you made the best one for you.
Right.
Now, you're stepping away from the comfort of your home state, your hometown, friends and family, and now you're moving on to a different state about 6-7 hours away in Pittsburgh. Now, we have to reiterate this whole idea of being the only one. And by the only one, meaning being the only African-American in the program. And you're probably one of maybe a couple hundred at Pitt at the time. What is it like for you at that time going into college knowing I'm going to be not only the only one, but the first one? What was that feeling like?
Well, initially, back then, the way we talk about being the only one today wasn't like that, back in the 60s and 70s. I realized, in my younger days, let's say between 8 and 12, I realized I was the only one on my, YMCA team. And then my teen years, let's say from 12 to 17, I was the only one on my Y team, my outdoor pool summer team, high school team. So as a matter of fact, I want to say I got used to it. I realized I was the only one.
Right.
But I will say this, which is a rather interesting point. Because I swam so well, it wasn't that big of an adjustment. It was more of an adjustment at the college level that everyone at the Division I level is good.
It's good. Yeah.
Everyone's good. So making it was great, but competing at that level was a whole different ball game. So, color really didn't play a factor in the pool. Color played more of a factor, outside of the pool, because think about it, you're talking about the 60s, the early 70s, and early 80s, of me just being the only one and just dealing with the outside factors outside of the pool.
You had that opportunity at the time just to get in the pool and be yourself. I understand what it's like, being the only one or being one of the only ones, because I grew up here in Hillsborough, the suburbs, not many people of color, so it's kind of hard finding your way. And I feel like when you're younger, maybe back then you did, but I know now I didn't realize that I was that odd one out. I think it's kind of hard because you look, they're your friends, you're hanging out with these people all the time, you're doing things with them all the time, and then there comes that point in time where you realize, oh, this is different, and I'm the difference. So it's really hard. Let's get into what it was like for you on the outside, just trying to manage being an athlete, but on the same time, you had to manage being one of the only ones, being the odd one out, because it's not easy just living like that. It's cool to get away from it when you're in your element in the swimming pool, or for me when I was on the basketball court. But away from that, as you get older, you start to realize that there's a difference. So how were you able to overcome those situations? What things happened for you with being that odd man out?
Well, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. It was probably right when I transitioned from Newark Academy to Livingston when I realized that, being an African American and being the only one in Livingston, and let's, preface the story by saying I was the only one my sophomore year in my sophomore class. There were two other African Americans, one in the 11th grade and then one in the 12th grade, and those two were brothers. So you're talking about three African Americans in a school that had 1,800 kids. So it was at that point that I realized that when I was not in the pool, I was an African American man, being ridiculed, one for doing the sport, another for how are you living up here in this area? The whole black people can't swim, all kinds of name calling. So it was at the high school level that I realized the challenges outside of the sport. And believe it or not, as I said in my story, the challenges that I went through outside of the sport are actually what fueled me in the sport. Because sitting up here and saying that, being called a nigger or being called a spear chucker or, what black people can't swim, I'm not going to sit up here and say, oh, I just shrugged it off.
Right.
It hurt. It cut into me. But fortunately, even though I have divorced parents, my base is that I had parents who supported me. I had a mom who was a nurse, who was taking me to these morning workouts, who was also taking me to these afternoon workouts. So I had a good base behind me of these things are going to happen, and it's a matter of your attitude and how you're going to deal with it. So I think that's what really made me the swimmer that I am, because I took all of that rage and that anger and I put it in the water. The water took a lot of my abuse, but I was also swimming rather fast with that abuse.
Right.
And, the other thing is that was mine, meaning the other kids that I was working out
They couldn't
with,
take that away from you.
They can't take that away from me.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. What was it like for you in the pool? When you were going in, when you were about to go on to a swim meet or you were getting ready for a meet, what was the preparation like? I feel like everyone has that. I don't want to say superstition, but everyone has their superstitions. But what was the preparation going into a swim meet for you? Other sports they have, putting in music, get hyped. Did you have anything that you did when you were trying to prepare for a meet that got you ready?
You know what? I look at the swimmers today, and I am so jealous of the stuff that they have. Number one being music. So you're talking about, for me, is most of the 70s and the early 80s.
Right.
And I don't think a Walkman was created until I was in college. So I didn't have music to listen to per se. But one of the things that, that I did to get myself mentally prepared is that I usually went into the locker room. So a good part of the swim meets, you have to remember swimming is a little bit like track and field. So I don't have to be on the deck of the pool watching divers dive. I don't have to be on the deck of the pool per se watching, the distance swimmers swimming their events. So basically what I would do is I would take, my 15 or 20 minutes before it was time for me to swim. I would do a warm-up swim. I would get warmed up. And then I would go into the locker room and then just have my own time to myself. Me with my own thoughts. And usually those thoughts were, I'm being straight up here. Most of my thoughts were, I am going to tear these white boys up.
As you should. As you should. That should be the mentality.
Because sometimes, I would go to swim meets and be in the locker room and it was like, oh, what's this black guy doing here? And I could take something like, what's this black guy doing here to, I'm going to show you why I'm here today. And like I said, it was rough outside of the sport, but as I got good in the sport, it turned into, don't get me wrong, I still had my, as we'll call them today, as you call them, your haters. I still had my haters, right. But I will tell you this, in any sport, once you start doing well in something, the negativity turns more into a positivity thing. So I think I was blessed with the fact that at the high school level, going into the college level, I was really good.
Yeah.
Think about it. I was good enough to make a Division I team. In any sport, I don't care what the sport is, to make it to a Division I college and play 4 years, whether it's fencing, wrestling, gymnastics.
That's a huge accomplishment.
It's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Right. Now, being a swimmer, as time goes on, I feel like the sport of swimming has gotten bigger because of the Olympics. You don't really see everything. There's not like a big professional league, the NBA or NFL.
Correct.
And people that I've seen, I actually know more female swimmers than I know male. Missy Franklin, and then you got Michael Phelps, Ryan Lochte. Those people of like those. Mm-hmm. Did you have any inspirations or anyone that you looked up to, or was it just you were good at swimming and that was all you had to back up off of? Because I feel like back then. Yeah. Who are you gonna look at to be, especially being a black swimmer? Right. There's no one that looks like us. Right. So did you look up to anybody, or was it just off the pure joy and passion you had for swimming that kept you going as a younger?
Part of it was definitely the joy of doing the sport and knowing how I could succeed at it. As for in the sport, I'm gonna put it out there. My biggest hero in the sport was Mark Spitz. Now, Mark Spitz was the first swimmer ever who got 7 gold medals in an Olympic Games, and that was back in the 70s. And believe it or not, Michael Phelps broke Mark Spitz's record. So I had Mark Spitz, even though we didn't swim the same strokes, but I still looked up to him I'm like, wow, look at this guy getting all these gold medals. No one can beat him in the pool. And he was my hero in the water. Right. So I would say Mark Spitz was probably number one for swimming. However, I'm still an athlete, still a Yankees fan.
Yeah.
The Yankees were in the World Series in the 70s and 80s, so I was a Reggie Jackson fan. Basketball fan, believe it or not, I did like Dr. J back in the day. Mm-hmm. So, I had other sports.
Right. You had other sports icons you looked at, of course.
Yeah. So, and to this day, I am still a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan. That's another story on how I am like that. But being a Minnesota Vikings fan, back in the 70s, once again, I had picked a squad that wore purple, and they went to 4 Super Bowls in my early age. So, I had other sports to look at that inspired me. Like, look at these other great athletes. Right. Doing what they do.
Who in your family was able to give you the biggest inspiration? Not necessarily through swimming, but who was there for you the most, who wanted to push you to be the best swimmer that you could be?
You know, this is another funny story, and I hope he gets to hear it a little bit. Is my mother, I would say, is my biggest inspiration. You know, with her being a nurse and working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you know, she was the one who was getting me to the pool before 6 o'clock in the morning and then going to work. And she was also the one getting me to the afternoon workouts. Since I had working parents, you know, they didn't get to see me, you know, swim per se. They got to hear the after stories. Oh, like, how did you do today? And I'd say I'd win, or I got second, or I came in third, swam against a couple of good fast swimmers. So the inspiration is, you know, what is it that you need? My father was also a bigger inspiration because, remember, he was the member of the Orange YMCA, which meant all of my pool fees were covered back then because he was already a member. So I'm going to say my mother more than my father, because my mother was the one getting me to these workouts. My father was probably, we'll say he was the money end of it, because he was already a member of the YMCA. Right. He was the one that facilitated me, you know, coming into that gym, showing a card, and I was. And
he
I
gave
was
you the start, right? Of course, yeah. So you being, once again, we're gonna keep reiterating this because we have to. You being the only one, it had an effect on you, clearly. But what was it like from your parents' perspective, having a son who really wasn't playing, quote unquote, the black sport in basketball? You know, you played baseball, but your main sport was swimming. What was some of the reactions that they got from other people? It's like, oh, even from family members, like, oh, yo, your son is swimming? This is something different.
You know, so, you know, my family, you know, my father, you know, grew up and worked in East Orange, New Jersey, predominantly African-American community. And my father had cousins who were on, you know, city council members in East Orange. And I had cousins who were in East Orange. And as a cousin, I got teased, you know, here you are doing this white sport. And it would turn into, oh, look at little Jimmy, because that's what I was called when I was younger. Oh, look at little Jimmy doing these white sports. But then I would have another cousin, you know, you'd have the one cousin who's teasing you on one end, but then you had another cousin who's saying, yeah, but he can kick your ass, you know, whether it was in baseball, whether it was kicking a soccer ball, you know, or just me straight up kicking the ass. So, you know, I had the family abuse, but, you know, it wasn't as bad as, you know, non-family, you know, outside of, you know, people that you don't know. Right. You know, I said, there's nothing worse. You go to a town and you walk into the locker room, because, you know, swimming's a sport where, you know, there's no separate locker rooms. You know, the visiting team and the home team are changing in the same locker room.
Interesting.
You know, and you'll hear a comment, well, I'm not getting changed in here with him, or what is he doing here? And, you know, I heard every comment imaginable. But like I said, fortunately with my mother was the one who got me, you know, you have to take this rage and this anger and you have to put it someplace. Right. And I put it in the water.
Is it harder being able to handle the vocal abuse that you get from people who look like you rather than people who don't? Because I've always felt like, especially me growing up in the suburbs, being in a predominantly white school, actually predominantly white and Asian, if anything, I completely understand the whole, oh, you sound like a white boy. Oh, like, yo, you're the whitest black person I've ever met. You know, things of that sort. Is it harder being able to handle those types of things coming from people that look like us rather than white people?
I honestly, I'm gonna say I didn't have that much of a problem with the, oh, you know, you talk like a white boy, you act like a white boy. I think because I was at a high level in my sport, that helped offset that a little bit. It wasn't like, oh, you talk white, you act white, and you're doing this sport. You know, it was, but he's really good. So that but he's really good part kind of overshadowed some of that negativity. I got to tell you another funny story. My father's was a barber.
Yeah.
For all of my life. He just retired maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the funniest stories I've ever heard him say is, my father was, I'm going to put it out there. My father wasn't the biggest fan of the fact that I swam. He would have rather me had played baseball or even soccer. But, I chose swimming. But one of his stories that he tells in the barbershop, and it's actually heartwarming, but he's kind of making fun of me a little bit, is the fact that he said he came out to see me swim in one of these championship swim meets, right? And that he drove 12 hours. That's 6 hours out to Pittsburgh and 6 hours back to New Jersey. And he said, I went out there for 12 hours of driving, and I only saw my son swim for a minute. So, so I swam, and I have to correct him all the time. I said, well, Pops, actually, I swam for more like 5 minutes. I correct him.
Right.
Because, my 100 breaststroke was around a minute. My 200 breaststroke was another 2-minute swim. And then, of course, I swam the 200 IM, which I did in about 2 minutes. So, collectively, was about 5 minutes. But the one event that I did well in, I did it in about a minute. So he loves telling that story that I drove 12 hours to watch my boy do good, but he only did it for a minute. So, he's complaining in one sense.
Right. But it's out of love,
yeah. Right, but it's proud, but, it's pride in the other sense.
Right.
So it's a good story that he loves to tell all the time.
What opportunities did you have? I had another Division I football player on the show last week, and we were just talking about, the lifestyle of an athlete. Now, we were talking about, and he played football at Nebraska, and he was a Heisman Trophy winner, so obviously his stature was a little bit different. Right. But you were at Pitt at a time where Dan Marino was the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Panthers football team, and you had all these great football players to go into the NFL.
Yes.
What was it like being a Division I athlete, or for even, screw that, what was it like being a student at Pitt at a time like that? Everything was probably crazy with everything going on.
So, as most, I don't know if folks are going to know this, but, I was at Pitt with your dad.
Right.
And, we had to get physicals each year. And I'll never forget this, ever. My first physical at Pitt was done at the football stadium. And the guy in front of me, I didn't know him then, but we all know him now, was Mark May. And Mark May was Dan Marino's right tackle. This guy stood about 6'6", 6'7", was 320 pounds. And I had never seen a man this large before.
That's a pretty big dude right there.
Big black guy. And I'll never forget him turning around to me saying, what are you here for? So he sees a guy that's about 5'10", 175 pounds. I said, yeah, man, I'm here for my physical. He says, well, what sport do you do? You run track or something? He had made, the
of course, that's the automatically assumption, yeah.
Right, so he goes, do you run track? What do you do? Because he knew I wasn't on the football team.
Right.
I said, no. I said, I'm here, to swim. And he laughed. So I say that story, back in August, of 1980, my freshman year, his senior year. Mm. Well, I had my first swim meet. And of course, my name was up in the paper. Now, one of the perks of being a Division I swimmer is we got to eat training table with the football players towards the end of their season, and then of course with the basketball players. So during the winter sports. So long story short, I got no shame. I ended up, showing my face in the Pitt News, which was our local school paper, and I showed it to Mark May. And he goes, I guess you are somebody, But like I said, one of the perks was we ate with the football team.
Did you get the same food as a football team? Because I've heard the stories about the different types of food the football team got over other teams.
If we got out of swim practice by 6 o'clock, now remember our practices went from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Wow.
Now, training table for the football team, I think back in the day, was maybe 5 to 6:30. So now, if you missed that training table, there was another training table from 6:30 to 8 because other sports did go past 6 o'clock, closer to 7. So we would have to go as what they go down to the tower. So I didn't always make the football training table, as we called it, where they did get the good food. They got the steaks, the vegetables, the salads, the drinks, everything. Yeah. We went to the secondary one a lot of the times, which we still had good food, but we didn't, we always joke, we didn't get the steaks and stuff. But as often as possible, where we swam and where the football training table was, like I said, if we were out, when I say out, I'm talking about out of the pool, dried off, walking out of the building at 6, yeah, we could go to the football, training table,
right?
Which was a nice perk.
What was it like at a time in Pittsburgh where there were a lot of big sports stars still playing at the time? You had Willie Stargell, Franco Harris. I mean, Dan Marino was literally the biggest star on campus, but he was still...
Right. But he was still overshadowed. So you bring up an interesting tidbit there. So obviously the Steelers and the Pirates had just come off of World Series and Super Bowl wins. And here we are, freshmen, at the University of Pittsburgh. So once again, I think I alluded to it early in the story. I happened to go to Livingston High, which was a fabulous sports program school. So I was around other great athletes. Right. And then you take it to the next level where I go to the University of Pittsburgh from 80 to 84. And I've got the likes of Dan Marino's, Mark Mays, Russ Grimm's. These are all Hall of Fame pro football players. And the list can go on and on. I could probably name another 8 or 9. I had Hugh Green. We had Ricky Jackson. We had Jimbo Covert. A lot of these guys have Super Bowl rings. A lot of these guys are in the Hall of Fame. But my freshman year, I didn't know. I just knew who they were. Right. I didn't realize that these athletes, were going to another level.
Right. They were as big as they were at the time.
There was a football player who actually ran track, who actually won 2 gold medals in track. Here I was the same with his name Roger Kingdom, who won 2 gold medals in the high hurdles. Yeah. What was at Pitt? We also had the female athletes. We had a girl swimmer, Soo Heon, same years I was there, who also made an Olympic team. So once again, I think part of my success was the fact that I was around other great athletes, not just in my own sport, but in other sports. Right. And there is a pride factor there where, you're around the Dan Marinos, so you want to be in the paper just as much as his name's in the paper, so it was a great time to be at the University of Pittsburgh.
Keep staying on that. What was it like being just a normal college student in the early 80s? Obviously times are way different now. Mm-hmm. You could probably had a little bit more freedom, so there's probably a little bit more craziness that went on back then than what goes on now.
Right.
So what experiences did you have just as a normal college student at Pitt?
So I would say one of the nice things about, I had never experienced dorm life. Dorm life was, where you had different guys, because, the girl, I didn't live in a co-ed dorm until my junior year. But one of the nice things is meeting the different people and the different backgrounds that they were from. Now, I did live in a dorm that was predominantly athletes. So it was nice to know, oh, wow, you're on the soccer team. Oh, wow, you're on the basketball team. Here's one of the linebackers on the football team. And I want to say it was either my sophomore or junior year. I lived on the floor with Marino.
Okay.
Yeah. He and Jimbo Covert were roommates on the floor. So, it was kind of cool, saying that, you lived on the floor with the starting quarterback.
Right.
So... I'm not going to sit here and lie. It had its advantages, being an athlete on campus. And for me, I'm going to say it was a bigger deal because I was, once again, the only one, doing a sport that's predominantly white.
Right.
So I was popular. People knew who I was. There were times that I felt I was just as popular as a Dan Marino. Oh, so you're the swimmer. Oh, so you're Jim Gamble. Yes, I'm Jim Gamble. So it helped, with social life and everything. But I think life got better for me, let's say, at the college level than, let's say, at the high school level. Because at the high school level, I had the outside factors more. When you get to the college level, as we joke about it now, you're more in a bubble.
Right.
You're
things are way more inclusive.
Right. Things are way more inclusive. So I'm not going to say there weren't, kids that still had some name calling, but from the high school level to the college level, it was a big leap. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if you're an athlete and you're doing well, you're looked up to as almost like, a hero in some senses. So my life, I would say, got better, when I got to University of Pittsburgh.
What were some of the accomplishments that or achievements that you had during your 4 years there?
So, the first accomplishment is that I got a letter each year. So I'm a 4-year letterman at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also a member of the first ever Big East team, which I have my ring here. So I was a member of Pitt's 1983 and 1984 Big East championship squad. Wow. So making a championship team was a big deal for me. I did some of my best swims ever at the college level. Fortunately, I did them in my junior and senior year. Some athletes peak, in their freshman and sophomore years. I was fortunate enough to do well in my sports towards the end of my career, so I peaked at the right time. I had a crazy coach, was never really crazy about him, but he wasn't there to be my friend. He was there to coach me. But he got me to do some of my best swims ever at the college level. So, 4-year letterman. I'm a Big East champion in 2 of my 4 years. So,
which is huge.
Yeah, which is huge. And, it also got me the position to be the assistant coach my 5th year. Helped pay for some education there. But it also got me, the assistant coaching position in my 5th year.
Right. When you got the assistant coaching position, at that point, were you saying, okay, my swim career is done? What did you even want to, or did you have the opportunity to continue swimming after college?
I had the opportunity to swim after college, but, every athlete knows, how far they can go. Right. Swimming is just like track, where swimming, they only take the top 2 out of each event. So, let's say if you are, we'll just use a sprint because everyone can relate to a sprint. So if you run the 100-yard dash, the Olympic team is only going to take the top 2, okay, and then they'll take 2 or 3 more for a relay, okay. So swimming's the same way. They take the top 2 in every event. Yeah. Now, for me, I swam at a Division I level, which basically means you're talking about, I'm just doing rough numbers in my head. There may be, let's say, 1,700, Division I swimmers, at the time. Right. Okay, so where am I in those 1,700? Well, I'm not 1,700. I'm also not number 1 or 2. I'm falling into, a top 20 or a top 25.
And you're competing against thousands of other people. It's not like you're joining a team and everyone gets a chance to play.
So answering your question, I knew at the end of my 4 years of swimming that, unfortunately, swimming's not a sport that goes beyond college. Right. Those who swim beyond college are those who have made some type of world games, Olympic games. Those are, I call those the elite of the elites.
Swimming's definitely one of those sports where you have to just be the best of the best. Right. Right. And if you're not, that doesn't mean you weren't good. You never were good. It's just that competitive and it's that hard of a sport. And you really can't compare to anything besides, I would say, like you said, track. Right. It's just one of those sports where if you're gonna get to a certain point, if you want to make it past college, you just have to be that good.
That good, right?
And even of those people, there's a small few that actually are successful at that next level.
Right. If you ever look at let's say the top 25 times in any sport in swimming, at a let's say like in an NCAA meet,
Right.
the winning time versus the 25th place time is usually less than 1.5 seconds between all 25 of those swimmers. So, and track is the same way,
Right.
For the most part. So you can't take all 25 to the Olympics. You can only take the top 2, and for relays, it's the top 4.
Right.
So I knew at the end of my career that I had gone as far as I could go, plus the swimming, plus the assistant coach position paid for my education. That in and of itself, has a lot to say. Like I said earlier in the conversation, I had a mother who was a nurse and a father who was a barber. Okay. And to go to the University of Pittsburgh for 4 years back in the early 80s, they really couldn't afford to do. So, I swam my way through college, as one would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. Your story now it's getting spread out a little bit more now that you were able to publish it. What inspired you? What made you want to even open up about your story as being the only one in swimming?
So that's a great question. And a couple of people have asked me that. So 2 things have factored me. Number one, my girlfriend said, you've got an amazing story. She does watch, the ESPN 30 for 30 stories with me because, I'm a big fan of the 30 for 30 stories. She goes, your story sounds like a 30 for 30 story.
Right.
And I said, usually the 30 for 30 stories are someone like me, but who become the elite of the elite.
Right.
So, and, I could allude to a swimmer who I met who you probably saw in the story. You could take someone like a Cullen Jones, who, by the way, is from Essex County. I was from Essex County. And believe it or not, his story tied to me a little bit, which was kind of nice. We both swam in the same division of our Y teams. So he swam for a different team, but we swam against his Y team. He was also born in 1984. And the day he was born was the last swim meet for me.
Wow.
It was a Big East championship meet for me.
Very ironic.
And as you can see in the story, I got to meet him, after he won a bunch of gold medals. And he was the first ever African American for the United States, to win gold medals. So it was kind of a, make my story come full circle. One, meeting him, seeing or being next to someone of the elite, and then, him getting to know my story.
Right.
But like I keep alluding back to, I just knew that I could take the sport as far as I could go with it. My story was to put it out there that, hey, I went through this sport at a time where it was extremely difficult to do. So part of it is I got this notion, just to put the story out there, that, hey, listen, if there's another child of color who doesn't think that they can do the sport, I wanted to say, hey, come talk to me. I'll tell you that you can do it. And here's how I did it. Okay? Yeah, I'll admit there's some DNA in there. My father was a competent swimmer. Well, a lot of our family members could swim. I guess I just was able to take it to a whole new level. But the story was to get it out there that, we do need to see some more diversity in the sport.
Right.
It's nice to know that Cullen Jones did get some gold medals as an African American. I think in our last Olympics, we finally got a female swimmer, African American, Simone Manuel, swam at Stanford. She's done phenomenal, and I think she's going to be on the next Olympic team. I would like to meet her one day. But it's just get the story out there. Let folks know that, hey, look at this guy. He did it back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay? If he can do it back in the 70s and the early 80s, look what you can do today.
You were able to do it at a much tougher time when it wasn't just you were trying to get through being the only one in the sport. No, you were trying to get through being the only one at your school, being one of the only ones in your town, being the only ones going to, events. And you talked about that, how you weren't even able to hang out with your friends like you wanted to because of the color of your skin. And you were able to take those hardships you went through and those disappointing moments. Hey, I can't hang out with my friends, but no matter what you do, no matter what you say, I'm gonna do this in the pool, and there's nothing you can't take that away from me.
Away from me, exactly right. You can't take it away from the person. I think USA Swimming. As a matter of fact, I think I've got a podcast, another one coming up in January, where there is a big push now in USA Swimming since my story came out. And then, of course, Cullen Jones, bless his heart, he piggybacked off of me and told his story. And he's got another phenomenal story of growing up in Irvington, New Jersey.
Wow.
Basically a kid going to school, competing against Newark schools. Yes, he did go to St. Benedict's, which was a great school for him to swim at, going on to NC State. But he does talk about the fact that he almost drowned at the age of 5. So he's a big advocate of African Americans knowing how to swim. So that's one of his big pushes. But back to USA Swimming, now that I've told my story and Cullen has told his story and Simone has told her story. So all of a sudden, all of these African American swimmers from the past, present, have all now come out and told their stories. And I think some of it may have been George Floyd influenced a little bit.
Right.
USA Swimming now has made a position for a lot of the elite programs for some diversity. And I've been reached out to, right in my own town, the YMCA coach for Livingston, West Essex Y, and another coach at the Madison Y, who I actually swam with back in the day. If I was 17, he was probably a 7 or 8 year old. But he's now the coach at the Madison Y. And all of these programs now, all of a sudden, are looking for, that advocacy person, to reach out to speak to, see my face, see my story.
Right.
For those kids who are afraid to come out, to now try and come out.
I mean, the story is inspiring. It's not one many can relate to in terms of the sport, but it's one many can relate to in terms of maybe they've been scared to go out and do something, not necessarily because of the color of their skin, because maybe they didn't feel like they could. There's a lot of different things you can take from a story like yours, not just, hey, I was the only black person at my school swimming in a predominantly white sport. You can do it too. But there are other inspirations that you can draw away from your story, which is why it needs to be spread and people should hear it, especially amongst the swimming community. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are swimmers, and even if I think about it in high school, I know that there is one black person on our high school swim team, and I'm friends with her. I don't really know many others, and I can't. And I can't think of it. I can think of black kids on the football team, and even I think about it now. You being the only African American on your swim squad, I was one of 3 black kids on our basketball team, and you're talking about a sport that is predominantly African American. Right. And trust me, we played some teams. I remember my freshman year, there was a guy on our team who now, it's crazy, he was barely getting off the bench playing JV basketball as a junior, his first year making the team, and now he's a senior at St. Joe's and might be getting his first Division I minutes after taking 3 years to finally walk on and play at a Division I level. And this kid barely played in high school. But it shows you keep working, you keep going, you'll have that opportunity. But I just think about it where I'm from. There's not many people that look like us. There were no black kids on our baseball team. There was no black guys on our swim team. Even the football squad, we had some. They all didn't play. There was enough. So I get it, and a story like this needs to be heard because I think it's a lot more difficult for us on a mental aspect outside of the sport, which we know still plays into us being athletes. The fact that we have to deal with that kind of stuff, and you're talking about the politics.
Yeah.
I get it. Now, I know about the politics of in-town sports. They're crazy, especially in these predominant white towns. Hillsborough is one of the biggest politically driven sports towns in the state of New Jersey, and I really feel that way. And I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, my town's political, my town's political. Listen, it was hard for me to play recreation basketball with the amount of politics that went into it. Oh, my kids have to play together, or this kid's the best, so he has to get the special treatment. I've been to tryouts where the quote-unquote best two players didn't even try out for the travel team while we were trying out and scrimmaging. They sat down on the bench. I remember the coach went up to him and said, hey, you guys are good, don't worry. And then I was thinking back, and I'm like, I'm better than these kids, but I still got to try out, and I didn't make it. But then I look forward to the future, and I'm like, well, at the end of the day, all these kids that, in terms of the politics of sports, who was quote-unquote the best, well, they're either sitting the bench playing JV or not playing anymore, and I'm at the top of the food chain.
Right.
And you see where that goes. But that just goes to show it's really how you play. At the end of the day, especially when you get to high school, it doesn't matter who said you were the best in third or fourth grade. It matters once you get here. Like my dad always said, he said the best players play.
That's right.
You know, you never have to worry about the politics and anything. The coach is like, I'm going to play who I think best fits my program and who's going to help us win.
Exactly. You know, it's also scary sitting here listening to you. You know, here you are talking about the politics of today. It's scary that those politics were going back in the 70s.
Right.
Okay? But just like your dad said, and I'm living proof of it, see, I never had to worry about a travel squad because I was the fastest. You know, I didn't have to worry about not making a team because at the, we'll call it the middle school and high school level, I was one of the fastest. So, like I said, it did help that I didn't have to do a tryout. My tryouts were already met just based on times alone. So I feel for the kids that have to go through what they're going through. But at the end of the day, if you have that passion, if you want to excel in the sport, you're right. It does not matter what the politics are. It just doesn't matter.
That's something that's very important. You gotta keep pushing. You gotta keep understanding that if it's the sport or if it's something, not necessarily sports, something that you want to do.
Exactly.
You just gotta keep going at it.
Yeah.
Before we head out, what is something that you wish people when this story gets a little bit bigger and it's spread across more platforms, what is the main thing you want people to take away from your life story?
I think I capped it up a little bit. You know, people want to know, how did I get through the sport? You know, someone even posed it to me, you know, what was my superpower? And I tell people all the time, my superpower was resiliency. You know, I used to have a bracelet that I wore that said, you know, I'm a resilient individual. And I think that's been the first part of my success is resiliency, to knowing how to deal with situations, good or bad. And what I really want folks to really come away with is, and it's probably a cliche at the end of the day, but it's, if you really put your mind to it, regardless of what it is, and we just talked about it a second ago, if you really put your mind to it and you put the time and the effort into it, you can succeed. Okay, am I going to sit up here and say you'll become the elite of the elite? No, I can't say that. But I can tell you that if you do put your mind, effort, your heart and soul into it, you will become accomplished at whatever it is you choose to do. And I think that's the other piece that I want to get across, that don't let anyone ever tell you you can't do something. That's my bottom line there.
Listen, no cap, fam. We're gonna have many more stories like these coming up on future episodes. But Jimmy, I want to thank you for coming on the show. This just another inspiring story, but something that I felt when my dad sent me your story, and then you said it to me. I think it was something that people just needed to hear. Yeah. Something very important that a lot of kids are going through, and something that I could say that I went through being the only African American in a predominantly white town, trying to make it through, and understand there are struggles. I think that there are people who don't necessarily understand that there is a struggle that we go through. I think people think, oh, you're living in a white town. You don't have any worries. You don't have to worry about racism. You don't have to worry about police brutality. You even had a story where you were talking about you were sitting in the car with a white girl and the cop came to the car and asked if the female was okay. Yeah. That situation,
That's not normal.
It's not normal. That's not normal. And that's the kind of things that we go through living in towns like this. And people don't understand that. No. It's not easy. It's extremely difficult. People think, oh, well, if you're living in a town like this, the trouble and the struggles that other African Americans go through just are non-existent. And that's bullshit. Yeah. Straight. That's bullshit. Yeah. If you don't understand that we go through the same things everyone else does, but our circumstances are different, and sometimes they're a lot worse since we're the odd man out. You can kind of blend in with everyone else if you're in a community with a lot of people that look like you, right. Because the people that are saying those things, it's easy for you to say that because. Right. Your community looks just like you, but not us. Right. You're driving late at night. You're worried. That's right. You go into certain people's houses. You act a certain way just to make sure they don't look at you as the stereotype. Exactly. I get it. I've been through all that, and I need people to understand that just because we live here, just because we're from here, doesn't mean we're not going through the same things as our other brothers and sisters. That's just how it is. Exactly. But a story like this is so important for people to hear, not just from a racial standpoint, but just a story of perseverance and resilience and understanding that, hard work and dedication and staying focused on your grind and on your craft, it's going to get you wherever you want to be. That's right. I talk about the podcast all the time saying this was nothing but an idea about a year ago. And look where we are now. We started off, released one episode in September, and we already finished one season. Now we're 7 episodes into a second season, and we're already thinking about, I'm already thinking about doing a bunch of other different things with this podcast and other different media outlets. So this is just the beginning. But you got to be resilient in anything you do. You got to be dedicated to what you're doing. But Jimmy, I want to thank you for coming on the show. This was huge. This is a great story for people to hear, and I guarantee people are going to love this episode. But No Cap fam, I will check y'all next time. Peace. Once again, No Cap fam, another successful episode of the No Cap Podcast Season 2. Make sure you subscribe to me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because a new episode is dropping every Friday and Monday. So y'all best be ready. Peace.